to our second annual Mega Wellness Summit, where we are transforming lives one aha moment at a time. I'm your host, Nikki Jensen, and thank you so much for tuning in and sharing this event with your friends and family. Today, I'm speaking with Sarica Cernohous, and I couldn't be more excited to dive in because we have an awesome show for you today. We're talking about the gut. We all know that IBS and digestive issues are at an all-time high. That's why we're going to discuss candida, bowel movements, the gut-brain axis, and of course, Sarica is going to tie it all in together for us with taking a natural approach on how to heal. Hello, Sarica. How are you?
Nikki, I am great. Thank you. It's so good to be back with you. I love our time together.
I do too. And I always love everything that you have to say because you have so much knowledge and so much to offer people that
you.
It's just, and it comes from a place of giving and not of a sense of ego. It's always from your heart, and that's what I really love about you. And you're just a whirlwind of information. You know so much.
Oh dear, thank you.
You really do.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
And
so
of course,
I want to dive in. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and of course, I am so stoked to be able to talk about more belly talk. I love this.
I know.
You know, I mean, it's just
we need it.
We do.
We need it. And more today than ever before. Mm-hmm. And everybody is like, what's going on with my stomach? And, diagnoses after diagnoses of IBS and all these other things that are associated, Crohn's, and I can go on for days. But I want to start with candida. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people struggling with candida, mm-hmm. and some of those people might not even know that they have candida. Right. Or what it is. So I really want to break it down and go back to the basics with what it is, why do we need it, and why does it go out of control?
Right. The issue that a lot of folks run into with candida or other types of overgrowth of microorganism in their system is it's kind of like a garden. And, in a garden, when we've got the soil and the water and the air and the nutrients in the soil, it's a right place for different things to happen, all different kinds of growth. And candida is a naturally occurring part of everybody's digestive system, their entire system, actually. And when it comes out of balance, it's because it's out of balance. The only way a person could ever rid themselves of candida is to die. It's something that is a natural part of who we are. But what's happened in this instance is like that garden. The candida is almost like, what's a wonderful plant that tends to take over gardens if we let it? Basil. So think of candida like basil. And if we don't keep that basil in check with trimming it back and with putting in other plants that can help to balance out the presence of that basil, then that basil in those conditions will take over the entire garden. And that's what ends up happening with candida or other types of overgrowth of other naturally occurring components of our system. So we want to keep that in check. So it's going to be there, but we want to keep it in its right place. And one of the things that really, really lends itself toward candida overgrowth, and candida is a yeast. I mean, it's just a naturally occurring yeast. And what lends itself to really propagating yeast, let's think about this. When people make pizza and they make the dough from scratch, one of the things that they feed the yeast is sugar. That's what gets the yeast growing. Well, in the modern diet, where we have had so much refined carbohydrate that most of us have all grown up on, and many of us continue to eat in different snack foods and whatnot, what ends up happening is that sugar supply is right there, and it allows the candida to really begin to flourish. And so one of the simplest things we can do if we seem to be having some kind of yeast or fungal overgrowth in our body, that can also present as vaginitis in some instances, different types of fungal infections on the skin, athlete's foot. Those are all markers often that there's just a little too much sugar coming into the system. And so one of the simplest things we can do is begin to reduce that sugar and refined carbohydrate content in our diet, so that by design what we're doing is we're taking away a little bit of what that candida is just being fueled by. So it's not a matter of eradicating it from our bodies, but it is a matter of bringing it into check. Just like, in a nice garden, we're going to have a place for the tomatoes and a place for the basil and a place for the lettuce. That's what we're going to be doing with the candida overgrowth.
So how do we know when we have it?
Well, it's one of those things that can present in a lot of different ways, and I gave some examples of that, of possibly different fungal infections on the skin, a real propensity toward urinary tract infections, and urinary tract infections that can have a lot of cloudy urine to them and kind of an itchy, burny kind of feeling. It can present in a cloudy head, a sense of just a thick-headedness where we don't have the energy and the clarity of thought that we know we're fully capable of, but just isn't there. That can also be a manifestation of it. There are so many different ways, and there are lists online that people can go and find and say, does this look like something that I might be dealing with? Another thing that I see with it when someone is really out of balance that way is that they have a real tendency to want to eat a lot more sugar and refined foods. There's a real craving for it. And that is the candida speaking on behalf of the system, saying, feed me some more. And that's where we have to really often use our stamina emotionally to say, I'm not going to feed that little monkey anymore. I'm going to pull back from eating so much sugar and so much refined food, and in the place of that, I'm going to be putting more healing fats. I'm going to be putting moderate protein. I'm going to be putting some fermented vegetables and fermented drinks. I'm going to be putting a little bit of raw vegetable, a lot of cooked vegetables, foods that are going to be truly nourishing to my body and that are going to benefit the rest of the system and actually help to bring in other good bacteria, good yeast products, because what I will get questions from people on is, I've been told that I have a candida overgrowth in my body, so should I stay away from fermented foods? And in fact, the fermented foods are one of the most healing and balancing types of foods that a person can bring into their system, because that's like bringing in more seeds for lettuce and more seeds for tomato. And again, that's going to help to balance out that garden where the candida has been overgrown. We're going to be bringing in other bacteria, other beneficial yeast that are going to help to counterbalance that overgrowth of what's happening there. And again, it's not the fermented foods, it's more the sugars and the refined foods that people eat that are the bigger issues. So it can manifest top to bottom, itchy ears, maybe waking up in the morning and having a lot of phlegm that you need to clear, or always having kind of a lot of phlegm that needs to be cleared. There are so many ways that candida can present itself that way.
Can you have candida in other places besides the gut?
Oh, sure. That's the thing is, when we think of babies with thrush, that is a yeasty candida type of overgrowth. And so now we say it's not in the gut. So it's not necessarily, although it probably is, it is in the gut, but it's represented further up in the gut. When we think of the digestive system, it's just really one long tube. And so in these babies, they can have thrush that, presents around the mouth, in the mouth, and then the mother can develop a fungal infection on her breast as a response. And so, on the skin we can have these things. It's not something that needs to be just, kept real close and tight there in the gut. And in fact, that's usually not how it presents.
Okay. And when it comes out, let's just say that you have some candida die-off, and it does come out in the toilet. And a lot of people will look at their poop in the toilet and say, whoa, what in the world? Does it oftentimes, that yeast and candida fungus, do they all, does it come out looking like little aliens in the toilet?
It can, but it also can represent, in Chinese medicine, and that's part of what my practice is. In Chinese medicine, we talk about these imbalances in digestion. And so for some people, it could just be a really loose stool that they see there. It is something that hopefully as a person is bringing balance into their system, they're not going to be having such an incredible experience of this clearing out of their system that they get sick from it. And they may not have something overt that happens in the toilet that way. Because I'm a big fan of not doing heroic measures because quite honestly, Nikki, I feel that most people are quite depleted, and heroic measures that were maybe appropriate for the average person's constitution of 20 to 25, 40 years ago, people can't, they're not able to withstand that kind of change because they are depleted at such a level because the nutrients haven't been getting into their body. And on top of that, they are so pushed in so many directions with stimuli and demands put on them. So to have these big heroic measures where we're looking for huge immediate changes in bowel pattern and, stones coming from here and all of this, I don't think it's smart. And I also don't think that it's something that is about true lifestyle change. What I'm more interested in seeing people do is the slow and steady progress of change where they are bringing in more nourishing foods, they are omitting the foods of convenience, the sugary foods, and they are bringing in counterbalances to issues such as candida overgrowth so that over time, as they have a gentle die-off, as the candida begins to lose its foothold in the face of better nutrition coming into the system and the body going from what would be considered a more acid environment to becoming a more alkaline environment, when this shift is happening, it's something that is not overwhelming the exit pathways of the body. And those exit pathways are, of course, the liver, the colon, the lymph system. And it should be a progress that happens without too much pain and that is really just a foothold of day in, day out true lifestyle change.
I agree. That was fantastic.
Oh, good.
Thank you. And I know that we touched a little bit on, bowel movements, but I want to just share with you my own bowel movement story.
Yes, that's okay. I talk poop all the time.
Right? We all poop. I think it's like it's what connects us. I think sometimes when I'm in the bathroom, I'm like, I'm so connected with somebody as famous as Jennifer Aniston because she poops too. Right. And that's how we all are human, and those are our bodily functions. So
they are.
Here's the pooping story.
Yes.
So when I changed over from a grain sugar diet, I changed to a grain-free, no sugar diet.
Yeah.
Everything started to bind up, and constipation was like a part of my life. And so I went from, pooping what it seemed to be regular poop to pooping pellets and now pooping like a rabbit. When I was eating, more grain or like more your typical American diet, to switching over to eating more like a rabbit, then I started to poop like a rabbit. And so I want to know, what it's true.
What should that?
What should our poop look like, and how often do we need to poop, and
oh my
what
gosh,
is normal?
I know, and it's funny. I feel like there's this awakening that's happening in the West where people are becoming much more observant of their poop, and they're talking about it more. And the thing is from my study of it, from the perspective of traditional Chinese medicine, and then also, how it's such a hot topic these days, I have continued to kind of hold to the thought that 1 to 2 bowel movements a day is appropriate. I think that if a person is going after every meal, that's a lot of motility happening there. And of course, unless a person just is sick in some way and their body's trying to release something that's very severe for them, people don't eat things and they immediately blast through them. That really doesn't happen. There's no way that it can happen that quickly. But it can get the motility happening of the gut. I would say 1 to 2 bowel movements a day is a very safe place to stay. And the consistency of that bowel movement should be not rock hard. It should pass easily. You shouldn't need to use a lot of toilet paper in the wake of it. It should not be a painful passage. There should not be much in the way of gas while you're passing or throughout the day. There shouldn't be a lot of bloating around this. And it should all be rather connected. It shouldn't be little rabbit pellets. What I see happening with a lot of people with the rabbit pellet presentation, one is exactly as you say, the type of fiber that is found in grains and in beans, that is just an incredible fiber for helping to bulk up the stool. And so when that is missing, when that's gone missing, that lends itself toward these more kind of rabbity, harder to pass bowel movements. Not necessarily with pain, but just not coming with as much frequency. The other thing that I see happening, and this kind of goes back to Chinese medicine a bit, is that those type of little rabbit poops that way and where they don't come very often, that's often associated with a degree of stress in the life. And, think of it. When we relax, when we go into a parasympathetic override in our system, that's when we get out of the fight or flight pattern. And our body says, oh, I'm safe here. I can just go to the bathroom. And that's when the entire bowel experience is something that allows for evacuation of what's in the large intestine, and it comes easily. What I think happens a lot around food is it becomes a stress point for people. And it can be indicative of other places where they're also trying to have some control in their lives. And it can be part of a bigger pattern of stress. And so I bring that into the discussion because I do think it requires addressing. And the other thing that I want to say about that as well is that in Chinese medicine, grains and beans are recognized as good qi tonics, good tonics to the energy. They can give us a long burn of energy. And it requires some energy to have a good bowel movement. It requires some energy to feel relaxed. And if we are running around in a sympathetic override pattern where our body feels a little skimpy on energy all the time, when it comes time to go to the bathroom, it's just not all going to quite be there the way that we need it to on the level of energy. And so I'm not saying that that's the instance for every person, but I think combined between all of those instances there where we're talking about a physical lack of a different kind of fiber that has a bulking action, plus also maybe a tendency to being in a sympathetic override and possibly kind of a control situation mentally, and then having the reserve of energy from this type of nutrition not being there. All of those things can kind of add up for having a bowel pattern that is not as full as it could be, I guess would be the right word to use there. And I know that there has been a very big movement away from grains and beans and whatnot. And, and probably other people on the call who know me would know that I come from the perspective of inclusion when it comes to nutrition. But that inclusion really should be recognized in light of proper preparation. And so I do think that there's a place for legumes and for grains in the diet, but they need to be prepared the way that our ancestors prepared them. So, and then when they are brought into the diet, it's amazing. In this prepared format, when it's done this right way, how the bowel pattern really begins to change. And also, these types of foods, they give us a sense of fullness and a lasting fullness that just having vegetables and meat does not fulfill. And all we can do is look at a bean or a grain and compare that to how a cow looks, or a piece of kale, and we can see that the composition of these foods is very, very different. And I believe with all my heart that it is something that our bodies have been designed to consume, as we've evolved as a species. I know that in a lot of the paleo communities, there's been a lot of discussion around, grains have only been, a part of common consumption for about 10,000 years or so. Well, in my research, I found actually that going back to Africa, there were remains of many different tools, as well as fragments of the protein structure of lots of different grains 100,000 years ago that were clearly being processed and consumed by humans. And so that really says a lot. It says a lot about the fact that they've been around a lot longer than many people recognize. But it also really speaks to the fact that even way back then, 100,000 years ago, these foods were already being processed. There were tools that were designed for helping to process these foods in a way that they would be bioavailable to us. So that was a long-winded answer about poop.
Are you kidding me? That was amazing. That was amazing. That's exactly what needed to be said, though.
Good. Okay.
So I agree with you. And what is so amazing about, astonishing, is that humans knew how to do this years and years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
Why can't we figure this out today? And just really baffles me.
I know.
We have lost that part of our taste buds where, fermented foods, we go, fermented foods, like, ugh. But here's the thing, is that we really should have more fermented foods in our diet and have a more sour taste. It's like we have lost that taste. And that's something that we need to get back. You're absolutely right.
It's true. And I mean, oh my gosh, I could talk a month of Sundays about this, Nikki. But it's true because, one of the things I do when I am working with patients, my intake form, I ask people to rate their flavor preferences, and that's sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and spicy. And here in the West, the rating is always, 9.8 times out of 10. It's usually sweet, but sometimes it's salty first. But it's always a combo of those two, or 1 and 2. And when I've worked with people from other countries, that is not the case. It is often sour, or it might even be bitter. And in Chinese medicine, each of those flavor profiles reflects a type of self-medication that we're trying to do through the food that we're eating. We're using our food as, that type of medicinal nourishment. And one of the things that I think is so brilliant is when I begin to see those flavor profiles shift for people, where they go from being a person who's really craving sugar to being a person who is beginning to appreciate more of the bitter and the sour, because you're exactly right. Sour is the flavor profile of the fermentation process. And it's interesting because I think a lot of us think, oh my gosh, fermented foods, how gross. But let's think about the foods in our common diet that do have that kind of salty, tart flavor profile. And that would be all the condiments that we use, from mustard to ketchup to mayonnaise. All of that. The pickles. That all has that flavor profile, and we use those types of foods regularly. The same thing with salad dressings. and this kind of bubbliness that happens with fermentation. We find that in sodas. And so it's really interesting to me how actually we still reach for that, but it has been harnessed and put into formats that actually don't serve us at all. They actually harm us. But there's a part of us that still reaches for those types of flavors and mouthfeels that we find in the common food, but had their root in the fermented food profile.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's I actually have a weird story around that too, because I really have a thing with wanting to be healthy, right? So I don't care what it really tastes like. If it's healthy for me, I'll just do it. But what happened is that I started to build a craving for fermented foods. So I wanted more sauerkraut. I wanted more kombucha. Like I'm obsessed with kombucha. Beet kvass. I mean, I love it to where my body just now is like, it wants it all the time. And, you know, if we listen, our body will tell us what we need.
Oh, my gosh, it's true. And,
you know?
No, it does. In the class that I teach, I really try and present that to people. It's like, just start doing this and see what happens, because to me it is like a pool party, and it is all your friends are in the pool and they're calling you to come in. I see it no different with what begins to happen in the shift in the palate when we start to incorporate truly fermented foods and we reduce the sugar. I mean, and it happens quickly. How people say, oh my gosh, like one patient, you know, God bless her, I was with her last week and she said, you know, I've done so good about taking out this, you know, one of these nasty flavored creamers from my breakfast coffee. And I'm just so thrilled for her that she's done this. And, you know, she put in organic half and half in the place of that. And so that was very helpful. But she had purchased some for a friend of hers who was visiting the house. And she said, well, you know, I've been away from this for like, you know, a week. I'm going to just taste it, you know, give myself a little treat. And she tasted it, and she said, in a week's time, she said, it just didn't taste good anymore. And I mean, this was like one of the big things for her to give up. And I said, that is your palate already changing that much. This is something that had been just a real big part of her life. She did not know if she was going to be able to step away from that. She did. And in that period of time, that's how things began to change in her brain and her biology. And that was so wonderful to see that, because when a person does that, they say, you know what? It's not as good as I thought it was. It's not as good as I remember it being. And that's an important thing, you know, why it is important to make some small changes, step away from it, and see what happens. That's such a big thing. And so what's happening with you, Nikki, is because I'm an herbalist, you know, all this training in Chinese herbal medicine, and, you know, as a practitioner, you've got to taste the herbs, you've got to taste the teas and become familiar with the flavor profiles. That is some gnarly stuff. It does not taste good. Some of it does, but most of it doesn't. And so my palate is pretty broad-minded, because I've just done this kind of thing for years. So but most people are not that way. But what I found when I really started bringing in the fermented foods is it was exactly as you say, my body started to crave more. And I can go about a day without any fermented foods in my diet, and then I just it's kind of like I start climbing the walls looking for them. So I get what you're talking about. It's wonderful to see that shift happening. And at first it may taste a little strange on the palate, especially when we're not used to that kind of thing. Because most of us have not been raised in homes where naturally fermented foods have been part of what we eat. It's going to be something that we have to pony up on, if you will. We know it's good for us, and so we're going to give it a try. And then just kind of stick with it for a short bit, and before you know it, it's amazing the magic that happens.
I agree. I want to, we had mentioned the brain a little bit, especially in regards to, you know, the very sugary creamer that was put into your patient's coffee. You know, everything that we eat, I feel affects the brain. So I want to walk with you now and talk about the gut-brain axis and how foods affect our brain.
Right. It's an interesting thing that has really come to light over the last few years, just in terms of research, of recognizing such a connection between the gut and the brain. And as many listeners are probably aware by now, but if you're not, oh my gosh, this is an amazing thing. That is where most of the neurotransmitters for our brain are created, is in the gut. And so we need a happy gut to have a happy brain. And so as we have a happy brain, the happy brain is going to want to direct traffic on keeping that happiness happening. And so it is truly going to drive our cravings. And it is through that connection that we do begin to make our choices. I remember being younger and starting to bring in a little bit of supplementation of vegetables, like in a powdered form. And this was many, many years ago. And I remember during that time, my body, it felt good to my brain, and I just remember thinking, I am craving vegetables now, and that was not normal for me. And it was because it felt so good, and there was something in what I was doing there that was helping the system to be stronger, to run better. And it was nourishing my brain by helping to make better neurotransmitters for my brain to work with. That was phenomenal. I mean, that was such a big thing for me to see. And the same thing has happened with bringing in more fermented foods. The other thing that I see happen now, because I work in working with different fermented beverages and veggies and whatnot, but likewise using fermentation principles as a means of pre-digesting other types of foods, making them easier to put to use in my body. So that's where we start talking again about, grains and beans and even nuts and seeds, getting those into a more pre-digested format so that our guts don't have to work as hard, so that the nutrition is there without needing to pull so hard on our inherent enzymes, on our hydrochloric acid production, and just giving ourselves the nutrition that we need. So that's a huge thing. And then when we do that, that allows for an inclusionary type of dietary practice, which is really good. I know one of the things that I think is so great is with the folks that I work with, when they really started adopting these practices of what I call pre-digestion, where we're using the soaking and the fermenting on these different types of foods, very quickly, kind of like with just working with ferments and how things start shifting quickly, when they are having these pre-digested grains or beans, and then they go out to a restaurant or to a friend's house and have a meal that just maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior they thought was going to be a very healthy choice for themselves. They go out and have that meal, and they realize, oh my gosh, I feel so bloated, my head feels thick, and it's because the body in that short window of time has gotten used to humming along on super high-octane fuel. It's fuel that is very easy to digest. It does not weigh down the system, and it's incredibly bioavailable. And in such a short window of time, it's like, whoa, that thing that I thought was okay is actually a lot tougher for me to work with than I ever understood. And, that's one of the beautiful things about the bodies that we live in, is that they're highly responsive. And so when we do the right thing and we kind of, shift gears and kind of go back to how we were doing things before, it's a very good exercise in showing us, yeah, I can do that. It's not like it's going to throw me under, a truck or anything to do that. But boy, do I notice that there really is a difference. And so it's worth it for me to make that little bit of change in how I prepare things, so that I am humming along at a much higher frequency.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So when we talk about probiotic,
Oh, probiotic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pre-digestion.
So we're pre-digestion. Thank you. If we're going to prepare our foods for best pre-digestion, what does that look like? Does it look like Does it look like we're going to be taking the grain and soaking it and sprouting it? If you can extend on that, that'd be great.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, it is. The way that I figure is I call it taking care of the future you is what you're doing. So when you do this, it isn't something that requires more of your time, because it really doesn't. But what it does require is forethought. And so let's talk about grains. Why not? Because they're so maligned, and I think they do have a place in the diet. So let's talk about grains. We'll talk about rice. And we'll talk about whole grain organic brown rice. And so in the instance of that, what you would do is you would take the rice, you'd rinse it, of course, and then you would put it into chlorine-free water. And if that's all you did and let it sit overnight, that in itself is going to have a softening capacity on the rice, and it's going to begin to degrade different components that are naturally occurring in all grains and beans and nuts and seeds, and those are things that science calls anti-nutrients. And so it's gonna start to have some inroads to breaking those things down. So an example of an anti-nutrient is lectin. And a lot of people, when they think about the issues that they have around grains, they think, oh, it's the gluten, if it's a wheat or a gluten-bearing grain. It's the gluten that's the issue. Well, when we look at the effect of lectin, it actually, in many respects, has a very similar effect to gluten, where it can have a tamping down effect on the cells within the large intestine. It can have a binding effect where it keeps us from being able to digest the foods that we're eating. And so folks, they may go on a gluten-free diet and they feel better, but they're not as good as they knew they could be. And it's actually because they still have these other anti-nutrients that are not being taken out of the equation because the grains are not being prepared properly. And so going back to the rice example, if you were to just soak it overnight, that would be helpful. But what would be a lot more helpful is to soak it and to ferment it a little bit. And so I like to use, my favorite ferment media is water kefir, or water kefir, some people call it. And I'll just add a little bit of that to the soaking water. And then I let it sit at room temperature, and I'll let it go for at least 12 hours. And I'll know that I'm really making some inroads to the breakdown of those anti-nutrients and a softening of the cell wall throughout the grain, and also a reduction of the carbohydrate content, because that carbohydrate content that is inherent within that food is what is going to be feeding the bacteria that are in the water kefir. And so when I go over to that bowl of soaking rice, I'll just kind of give it a little shake. And when I do that, I should see little bubbles rising up. And the bubbles are the fermentation process underway. And so when I see that and it smells maybe a little bit tart, kind of like almost a sourdough scent, it's like, yep, we're ready. Let's go cook this thing. And so the setting up of that takes no additional time. I mean, it's nothing. And then you let it sit there for, that long. And then when you go to actually cook it, it's already been softened by what you've done there. And so the actual cooking time is incredibly shortened over what it would be if it were being prepared from the hard state. And the digestibility of these two, so say you took, organic whole grain brown rice, that was prepared the way most people would prepare it versus something that would have been soaked and fermented a bit, the way that it feels on the teeth and it feels going through your gut is such a marked difference. So that's what it is. In terms of a person's actual time into the cooking, it actually shortens that part because it softens. And so but it requires forethought. And so it's very rare in our house that I will just whip up something. It's like everything, was started at least probably the night before. And then, I'll cook it the next day. And I'll just make things in large batches. I find that beans, they freeze very well, so I'll make a bunch of beans at a time and store half of them in the freezer so that, if we are in a time pinch, it's no biggie to grab them and, put the container into some hot water, let it start to defrost, and then put it, into a pan and cook it up for dinner or something. So, it's just forethought is what it's all about.
I love that. Now, when you're cooking rice, are you cooking brown rice? And does that fermentation process help break down phytic acid?
It does. And what I've seen a lot of folks do is they'll maybe use the whey from making yogurt or a little splash of milk kefir or something like that as their fermentation starter. And there was a white paper that I read a few years ago that was a study on using dairy-based ferments as a soaking media, and the fact that the calcium that is naturally occurring in that actually can get in the way of the phytic acid breakdown. And the reason phytic acid is an important thing that we want to break down is because it binds to minerals. And that's just what it does. It's just a naturally occurring thing that binds to minerals. And we need more minerals. We really do. People are so adrenally exhausted on balance, and the minerals are a cornerstone component to healthy adrenal function. And so any way that we can support that process, the other thing that's happening to people because they're in such adrenal burnout is they're also in sympathetic override. And when we're in sympathetic override, our stomach, which is where the hydrochloric acid production happens, our stomach isn't functioning as optimally as it should because we're in this fight or flight pattern. And so the hydrochloric acid production is not being at its greatest. And so when people go to consume foods that contain minerals, whether it's meat or grains or whatever the thing may be, if the hydrochloric acid production is compromised because of a stress state, it's not going to be able to break down the minerals that are there because that's one of the things that acid does is it cleaves out the minerals. The other thing that it's going to do is also not be able to break down the protein that's in that meal. And it's also a first line of defense against any pathogens that come in the system. So we really want to support hydrochloric acid production, and one of the ways we support hydrochloric acid production is by having a balanced adrenal function, because then we're out of that fight or flight mode. So you can see that this is a real circular pattern, and it starts with not just trying to bring the stress down and have a calm place when we eat, but it also, because we're all so pooped, it also has to do with making sure that the foods that we're eating are in the most bioavailable format. And these pre-digestion techniques, they do that for us. And that's actually how foods have always been prepared, and they haven't been for like the last, 100 years or so. So we've really backed ourselves into a corner with all of this. So we've got to start making some significant lifestyle changes, and a little pre-thought on how we prepare our foods is a big part of it. So yes, the phytic acid, we want to break that down. And if we're using a dairy-based ferment to kind of impregnate the water for a fermentation cycle, the calcium that's naturally occurring there is going to get in the way of that phytic acid breakdown. It just does. And so we want to go ahead and use a ferment that doesn't have that calcium in it. And that's why I like water kefir again, because it's not dairy-based. And it's so cheap to make. Oh my gosh, pennies a day to make this stuff, and you can use it for other things. And so that's what I like to use. And then what that does is it's through fermentation that phytic acid is broken down, pretty much done away with, which is amazing. And that's important because humans do not have the enzyme that's needed for breaking down phytic acid. Other animals do, but we don't. It's an enzyme called phytase, and we don't have it. And so we need to help the process along so that we're able to get that nutrition. And again, the soaking and fermentation is where we're able to do that.
Wonderful. It seems like a lot. And I know that people can reach out to you for questions because people are going to have their own situations and stories that they're going to want some personal attention. So just to let everybody know who's on the call and listening today, that I will at the end let everybody know your contact information. So everybody will be able to email you and go to your website, and there'll be no confusion there, so they can easily get a hold of you to, start getting their life in balance. And you know a lot about a lot. So you know a lot about a lot. And people will be drawn to you for their go-to gut health, you know,
right?
And to solve that.
Yeah, and
issue.
It is a lot, Nikki. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot to think about. It really is. And I know in that little segue there, I said a lot. So I want everyone to understand that I recognize that. But the reason I said a lot is because there is so much that is tied here in together. And it's not about reducing yourself to like 4 foods you know you can eat, because there is no vitality to be found in eating only 4 foods. So we do have to look at the whole picture. And I think it is incredibly important to recognize that the greatest vitality comes from inclusion and having balance in our lives. And that is, quite honestly, that's part of the reason why I wrote my book, The Funky Kitchen. That's why I created the program for The Funky Kitchen, because I go into this theory more deeply, not a whole lot deeper than we're doing here, but you got to have buy-in. I mean, people have to understand why this stuff is important. And I know you're going to be offering this program at a discount to the listeners. And so that right there is a foundational support. And I'm just so thrilled that you're going to be offering that to people, because it's one thing, you know, to hear me sit here and talk about this stuff. It's another thing to put the rubber to the road and start doing these things and putting it to use in your life. But you've got to have direction on how to do that. That direction needs to be really clear, and you've got to have support sometimes when you're doing it. So to everybody listening, I just want you to know that there's a lot more of support here than just this discussion.
Absolutely. And I love your programs. I love how you put together everything in your programs, because for one, you're so organized, and 2, you're just like an encyclopedia to where people can easily understand their body better and apply your techniques right away to their life. And so if you can tell me about 3 to 4 pointers, and you can tell the audience this too, how does your program propel people with their gut health?
Right. Well, the program really is about these pre-digestion methods. And so what we do is first I just make sure everybody is set up with the right tools in their kitchen, because it's kind of hard to do stuff when you don't have what you need to do it with. And so that's the foundation. And I'm a big fan of not using expensive tools. I mean, there are some things that are a bit of an investment, but let's make it a high-quality product, and, you know, you only need to buy it one time, hopefully, in your lifetime. But I really want it to be as simple and straightforward as possible. So the tools and also good sources of ingredients to work with. So that's what, you know, the foundation of the course is. But then I go into these pre-digestion methods where I'm talking about culturing and fermenting, and, you know, how that applies to things like yogurt and vegetables and nuts and seeds and grains and beans. We do that for the whole course. And then, of course, I also get into one of the other big topics, bone broth, or just nourishing broth. I've got a recipe in the course for people who are vegetarian to bring in a broth for them as well that still has a very solid nutrient content in terms of mineralization, but, of course, isn't made from, you know, animal flesh, because that's important for some people, but they still need that bioavailable mineralization. So I go into all of that, and in doing so, they're action items. Everything's divided into modules, and each module has its own little bit of homework. And on top of that, for every person, you know, who's in it, they are in contact with me then. And, you know, if after they've listened to a module they have questions, no problem. I mean, they can shoot me an email. And I've also got an ongoing private Facebook page for those that are on Facebook, where we just have this awesome community of people who, it's not just me supporting, it's others who've gone through the class, you know, and people who still are, you know, working very in depth with the material, taking it a lot deeper. And it's just so cool to get that exchange from people around the world, because we have different environments they're living with, different types of ingredients they have at their disposal. So we're able to really get a full picture on what's going on here, because every person's situation is going to be a little bit different. However, there are common threads, and that's what the course is designed around, is these common threads, and allowing the grace for there to be places of making mistakes. I mean, heck, sometimes when I ferment vegetables I'll still get mold. I mean, it can happen. And so not taking it personally, but then at the same time, having a place and a person to post to and say, hey, is this safe, and have that discussion. Because, Nikki, let's get real. It is totally strange to take food, leave it out on your counter for 30 days, and then go feed it to your kids. I mean, that is like not what most people do. So it's something that you have to feel like, okay, I've got someone who has my back on this. Let's talk about it. So that's what the course is about.
That is very true. I know when I first started fermenting, it was like, is this right? Does it taste right? Is it supposed to do this? Is it supposed to look like that and smell like this? You definitely need some guidance. And good thing I had my mom help me. She's a health guru. I mention her a lot during Mega Wellness Summit and all the other things that I do. But if I didn't have my mom and Donna Schwank, I think that I would have just not really knew or known what to do. And then I met you. And you know exactly what to do. But I had already been fermenting for quite some time, but after, I met you. So
good.
But you have definitely tied it in. And I thank you for that. And I have learned a lot from you. And I know that people listening on the call and who join your programs will definitely benefit.
Oh,
I just benefit from knowing you. So that's how grateful I am. I just want to ask you one last question before I let you go. What, if you could just sum something up just really quickly, and I'm going to give you a really big question here.
Okay.
What is your top secret to healing digestive problems? And you probably already said it, but
no, I didn't.
I just want to just simplify that huge question.
No, I'm super stoked you asked, because we didn't even, it's funny, people will say to me, okay, look, I've got bloating, brain fog, da-da-da-da-da, and they'll tell me they're eating all this great food, it's got nutrition in it that's up the walls, I mean, it's just really good stuff. And then we get into talking about their spacing of meals. And we realize very quickly that they're eating all the time. And, just a little nibble here, a little nibble there, or the whole concept of, you have your meals and then you have a small snack in between. And honestly, so much can be remedied by making, when you eat, about the same time every day, and giving a very clear directive to the body of, okay, this is the time to eat, and then in between meals, the only thing that goes in your mouth is plain water. And when we do that, that allows for the proper digestion of that given meal without muddying the waters of bringing down another bit of food to deal with within an hour and a half to 3 hours or so. And so surprisingly, after everything that we talked about, one of the biggest things that I run into with this and that I think can make a huge impact in people's wellness is the spacing of meals. But you can't have meals that are well spaced out that are skimpy meals. They've got to be meals that are very nutritious. So not complicated meals, but nutritionally dense meals that only happen 3 times a day, and just water in between. And in doing so, you give that clear directive. Your body is like, okay, this is what we're focusing on, and it allows the proper digestion of that. And it also begins to allow your body to move from being a sugar-burning, needing to always kind of snack to keep your energy up kind of person, to a person who is learning how to pull upon their own fat reserves, which we all have our fat reserves, as a fuel source is needed. And so if I could sum it up, I would say it would be nutritious but simple meals not more than 3 a day, not less than 3 a day. I mean, maybe if you want to do a long fasting period, occasionally maybe just have a broth meal for one meal, that's okay. But giving that very clear directive to the body. And then I would also, of course, be bringing in some fermented food. And any person who knows me knows I always say lots of butter or grass-fed ghee as well. And simple nutrition.
That was perfect.
Good.
That's exactly, that's perfect. That's not the answer I was looking for, or not expecting, I should say.
Oh,
that
good.
wasn't the answer I was expecting. So I'm grateful that you put that awesome spin on it.
Oh, good.
Because, yeah, and I hear so often that when you boost your metabolism, that you need to be eating about 5 or more meals per day. Mm-hmm. So would you agree with that?
No.
Because it seems like with this.
No, I don't at all.
A lot of.
I know it kind of flies in the face of what a lot of people are doing, but it is one of the simplest ways I know to reduce the bloating and to get real clear with the body on what is needed when, because that's part of the thing. The waters really have been muddied, and what I consider that to be, this whole thing of needing to eat 5 or 6 meals a day, I feel like that's responding to a child who's having a temper tantrum. And the child who's having the temper tantrum in this instance is your blood sugar, your worn out adrenals, all of that. That's all having a temper tantrum. And so what do? We give the child a piece of candy, or it could be a handful of raw almonds, or a bite of an apple, or whatever the thing is. The point being is you're never getting to what the root issue is, which is we need to bring back that adrenal health. But that adrenal health comes by giving very clear direction on, okay, here's your food. You're going to digest it now. It's going to be a super nutritious meal. It's not going to be an overly complicated meal. It's not going to be something that's got, like 30 different ingredients in it. That's a lot of complexity, especially for the overtaxed bodies that we have right now. So it's nutritious. It's an in-depth nutrition, but it's simple. And what happens in that instance, and then, you go 5 hours between meals, and that should not be a problem. If it is a problem, that means you need to increase your nutrition at the meal that you ate before. And so what we do with that then is exactly that. We give the body what it needs. It has some fuel to run on, and anything that it needs beyond that, it starts learning to pull on its own reserves. So again, this isn't a cup of black coffee in between or a cup of tea. It's none of that. It's just water between the meals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you know what? This just came to me. We definitely need a class on adrenals.
Yeah.
Because you've brought that up so many times, and it's something that I know that I personally struggle with, and I know that there's a lot of people going, adrenals. Right. So that could be half or all of their issues, and they don't even know that it's because of their adrenals. So maybe that's something we should talk about for the future, Sarica. And if anybody's listening on the call, they should go ahead and let me know. Yes, get her back on for adrenal class. So we'll let everybody know in the future. Would you be willing to do that? I didn't even ask you.
Of course. Always. I love our time together.
Okay, good. Fantastic.
Good.
I want to thank you so much for being on the call with me. I will let everybody know your information, your contact info, of course, how to get into your programs and really get underway with their gut issues. So thank you so much. I appreciate every single second of your time.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for being here. This is a blessing. Thank you.